Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. So it's Canada Day here in Canuckville, and I figure since I'm Canadian, I might as well do a video that's a little more Canada-centric than most. I'm going to do the history of early punk in my area using physical media. Now, by my area, I mean London, Ontario, which means jack shit to most of you. But London's in southwestern Ontario. It's about 100 miles west of Toronto. A little over 500,000 people. Nothing crazy, but we have managed to produce some half-decent punk bands and some half-decent punk records. Our most noteworthy punk exports, I guess, as it were, would be the Demics and 63 Monroe for sure, but we'll get to them a little later. I used, as a bit of a guideline, like I guess a timeline for this, I used a blog post that was posted online a few years back. It was done by a guy named Dave, who, along with his wife, published a fanzine, a pretty popular fanzine here. It was around for years. It was called What Wave. Kind of a Bible for people that are into garage rock and garage punk. Very well done, very thorough. They did quite a few issues. I'm sure a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into this thing. It was everywhere when I was a kid. It always came with like a 7-inch or a cassette. It was just very, very well done zine. So if you're into garage rock and garage punk and you see like back issues of this floating around somewhere, definitely pick them up. It's worth your while. But anyways, Dave from What Wave did a blog detailing the history of punk in London. And he was there from the beginning. He knows a lot more about it than I do. I was a child when this all, rolled out. So yeah, I used his blog as a bit of a timeline for what I'm doing here. So hopefully I make some sense. Anyways, the history of punk in London kind of starts in about 1965. There was a collective of artists / musicians that wanted to start a band, and they did, and they started a really weird band. A band that it used homemade instruments, it used fucking kazoos, it used really whatever they could get their hands on. They did some shows at the Forest City Gallery, they got some shows at the York Hotel, which would later become called The Office, which now sits sadly vacant. And they called the band the Nihilist Spasm Band. Now, I can't imagine what people thought of them in the 60s, because they're weird by today's standards. And they still play shows today, which is mind-blowing to me. But they've since been credited as being one of the bands that kind of laid the groundwork for what has become, the noise scene, the avant-garde scene. Very influential band, just one that a lot of people just don't know about. So that's where it kind of started. That's where London's acceptance of kind of outsider, uncomfortable music came about. And then in 1975, Roxy Music played, and that kind of opened people's eyes to the fact that there was, a lot of different stuff out there that was interesting. And then in 1977, we got the first punk show here. It was at an upstairs loft downtown somewhere to 20 or 30 people. And it was the Diodes from Toronto. So that kind of gave people the initiative to go and start their own bands, which they did. So the first band I'm going to discuss is not it's not punk by definition. They're really just a rock and roll band, but they're called Uranus. Like I said, just a rock and roll band. There's a little bit of a rockabilly influence there, a little bit of a surf influence. There's quite a few influences to their music. They're very capable players, very good musicians. They had played in other bands previously to Uranus, but now with Uranus they had original material, and they also had a fair amount of covers. But the thing is that you couldn't, as a band, you couldn't get booked in a bar or a venue at that time unless you were a cover band, preferably a rockabilly or a country cover band. Like I said, Uranus, they did their fair share of covers, but they also did their fair share of originals, which was kind of career suicide for a band trying to find shows at that point in time. But somehow they managed to get somewhat regular shows at a dive bar called the Blue Boot. Now the Blue Boot doesn't exist anymore. The building's long gone, and it's been replaced by Budweiser Gardens, which sits on that spot now, which is a weird irony because you had the Blue Boot, which was this grimy dive bar that it unwittingly kind of spearheaded the emergence of punk in London, and had all these like bands that no one knows about these days playing there, and it's been replaced by the venue where like huge artists come to play London now. So it's just an odd bit of irony. But anyways, Uranus was playing the Blue Boot all the time, and they started releasing records. So all their records were on Trilogy Records. So the first 7-inch came out in 1978. It's called 53 Buick. There's 4 tracks on this. There's 53 Buick, Handcuffs, Tommy Get Your Gun, and I'm Wonderful. So yeah, that's the first Uranus 7-inch, 1978. The second one came out in 1980. It's You're So Square, backed with Secret Agent Man, Johnny Rivers track. You're So Square is Elvis Presley's song, apparently. And then also in 1980, you had the LP, also called You're So Square. Quite a few tracks on there. There's 12 or 13 tracks on it. It's a solid rock and roll record. Really well done. There is another 7-inch. It's called Maybe Baby. I do not own it. I've never actually seen it. I'll get it one of these days. So that's about it as far as Uranus's recorded output. Members went on to be in the Symphonics, the Livin' Blues Band, Slugfest, Hank and Frank, a few other ones. So then we move along to 1978. Now, the Demics, who are, arguably one of the best-known bands from London, at least in the old days. The Demics had started in 1978, and they were playing shows at like the York Hotel, and then became regulars at the Blue Boot, thanks to Uranus, who they had become drinking buddies with. So Uranus hooked them up with shows at the Blue Boot. But they hadn't released anything yet. Now, Rob Brent, who's a member of the Demics, his brother Steve Brent went to Montcalm Secondary School, and him and his buddies went to a show at Alumni Hall, and it was Elvis Costello and the Battered Wives from Toronto. And it had an impact on them, and they decided to start a band. And they did, and that band was called The Perks. They went into a recording studio, Oz Records, or Oz Recording in London, and cut a 7-inch, and then released it. And there's the 7-inch. It's in this oversized manila envelope sleeve, silk screened with the 45 adapters. It's funny to me that the brother of one of the Demics is in this band, and they actually managed to get a record out before the Demics did, so it's kind of interesting. But melodic, catchy, one of my favorite records from the early London punk scene. I've been told many times that this is the hardest record, like as far as early London punk goes, to find. I disagree. I've seen this record a bunch of times. Just never comes with the sleeve. The sleeve's always either really damaged or just not there. But I ended up getting a contact address for one of the guys in the band, for Greg Dicon, and emailed him, and he sold me one for a good price. And apparently most of the ones that he had were ruined because they got set too close to a space heater and warped and melted. So I guess I kind of lucked out. I got one in perfect shape. He signed the label for me, which is kind of cool. But yeah, The Perks, 1978, pretty much the first actual, I would say, punk record in London to be released. Next up, we get to the Demics, who we were just talking about. Now, the Demics, rock and rolly influenced punk, very obnoxious, very identifiable vocals. Keith Whitaker had definitely had his own style. It was raw, but yet smooth at the same time, if that makes sense. Very, very good band. Their songwriting is impeccable. In 1979, on Ready Records, they released a 12-inch called Talks Cheap, which is my favorite Demic stuff. You got 5 songs, including New York City, which is their most popular track ever. It's not my favorite of their songs. I never really got the appeal of the song myself, but a lot of people did. But yeah, the Demics, Talks Cheap, 1979. And then in 1980, they followed it up with an LP on Intercan. From everything I've read and any interviews I've seen or whatever, the band was definitely not satisfied with this record, and I can see why. They had kind of a big name producer do it, and he produced it like a big name producer would, and it just kind of killed their sound a little bit. There's keyboards in here that don't seem like they belong. I mean, it's an okay record, but I can see why they were disappointed with it. Still happy to have it, but, not bad. And then in 1981, I have a 45 here. It's The 400 Blows, backed with All Gone Wrong. This is one I didn't even know existed until recently when I picked a copy up. It's on Intercan as well. There is a 45 for New York City, but I do not own that. One day I will, I'm sure. But yeah, the Demics, definitely one of the most well-known bands from this area from a historical perspective. Until Keith Whitaker's death, a bunch of years back, unfortunately. Left a big void in the scene at the time, I'm sure. What's next here? The Regulators. It's on Ready Records, 1979. This band is hard for me to describe. I can't really compare them to a lot of bands. It reminds me of something that might have existed in like the early New York City scene, like around the Velvet Underground and bands like that. It's one of those. I almost don't like it, but I kind of do. Like I'm really on the fence about it. It's got a super annoying Sharpie marker fucking price written on it, which is irritating to no end. But I would upgrade the cover, but I don't want to kick down $100 for it. I got this for like dirt cheap. The record's called What's in the City. That's actually the B side of it. The A side's called That's Right, Nothing's Left. You got members of this band went on to be in the Sinners, who we'll talk about shortly. But the Regulators, it's just, I don't know. It's one of those early London punk records that I think is just okay. Next up, 1980 on Silent Head Records, we got Crash 80s, Waiting for the Heat, backed with Thrills. This is great. It took me a while to warm up to it. I mean, it's definitely cut from the same mold as the Demics, but it's replaced the kind of raw obnoxiousness of the Demics with kind of a weird, desperate kind of vibe, like a bleak, just it's like a shitty rainy day, and it's just, but I happen to like music that sounds like a shitty rainy day. Yeah, Crash 80s, really good. Not a real easy record to find. I had a copy with no sleeve for years that I found in the thrift store until I ended up getting this copy, which is bang up shape. Members of this band went on to be in Generics, Suffer Machine, Conning Tower, and Legend Killers, among others. But definitely a good record. Crash 80s, 1980, Silent Head Records. Now, we just mentioned the Sinners, so let's do that. It's their No Brains Required 7-inch on Rude Records. It's from 1980. People from this band went on to be in the were also in the Regulators, Spiral Scratch, the Crawling King Snakes, the Low Down Dirty Mojos, etc. This is one of my favorite records from the early London punk stuff. Very, very catchy, up-tempo. It just sounds fun. It exudes fun. I'm into that. Very, very good record. This is one of the harder ones to find of the early London punk stuff for sure. And I'm glad I did. I did pay dearly for it though, but whatever. I'm happy with that. So the Sinners. Now we go to 63 Monroe, our other more popular export. Now, my dealings with 63 Monroe, they've been around since 1979 or so. I saw them a bunch when I was a kid. I've seen them actually fairly recently, I suppose. But I didn't appreciate them back then as much as I do now. Like back then I just wanted loud, obnoxious, fast, noisy shit. And with 63 Monroe you get more of a rock and roll based approach with a glam rock influence to it. There's still a punk vibe going on with it, but not all the time. A lot of times it's just more rock and roll based, and there's definitely a glam rock thing going on there. I remember their singer was a fixture downtown. The singer is Stephen R. Stunning. He's a super tall, lanky guy, peroxide blonde hair. He would wear 300 fucking pounds of studded belts and chains hanging off him. You'd hear him coming 4 blocks down. But he was just, to me and my friends, we were just kids. And he was kind of intimidating, just because he was an older guy and he just looked kind of crazy. Turns out, super nice guy. But yeah, they still exist today. So they've got perseverance on their side. Now the first record they did was on Nardum Records in 1980. It's the N.F.G 12-inch. Doesn't pop up a lot. I've seen it a few times. It's kind of an expensive one, but I don't have to worry about that because I already have a copy. So yeah, 63 Monroe, N.F.G, 1980, Nardum Records. Then you go to 1983. You get a 45 out. Henry VIII. It's a cover of the Herman's Hermit song. The B-side is called Soup to Nuts. Doesn't show up as much around here as I would expect. I've only ever seen it once or twice, to be honest. But yeah, Henry VIII. There's a video for Henry VIII that used to show on, or used to get played on Much Music fairly often, which kind of always blew my mind. But then you got 1984 on that's Henry VIII was on Savvy Records, and you go to 1984, also on Savvy Records. You got White Christmas. It's the same song on both sides. One's stereo, one's mono. This one never turns up either, and it seems to when it does turn up, it never has a sleeve. So I guess I kind of lucked out on that. But yeah, that's the one you see the least, I think. And then in 1985, also on Savvy Records, you got their LP, Stinkin Out The Joint. This is where my experience with them kind of comes into play. It was around this time period that I started seeing them play shows. I remember one time, some guy was, dancing and slamming around. He jumped up on a table, flew off it, gave me a missing link headbutt directly in the face, broke my nose, made me all fucking sick feeling. I had to leave the show because I thought I was going to puke and pass out. But I guess that's the appeal of punk, isn't it? So yeah, 63 Monroe, Stinkin Out The Joint. And then this one here is not an old one, but I figured I'd throw it in. It's on Rave Up Records. It's from 2007. It's Hijack Victim. It's their demos and shit like that. Now, back to the subject of their singer, Stephen R. Stunning. That guy actually ran for local politics at one point in time. I have a newspaper clipping of an occasion where he was in Niagara Falls, and he was there with his wife or something like that, and he was shooting some photos of the falls because it's one of nature's most spectacular things. And he happened to look down and saw a guy floating by him down the river, and the guy actually went over the fucking falls. But I think he lived, so that's pretty crazy. But and then the newspaper interviewed him and talking about it and shit like that. But kind of a cool side note to kind of an interesting band. So yeah, 63 Monroe, one of London's best known. Now we move on to a band that I know fucking nothing about. No one I know knows really anything about this band. Definitely sounds like an art school kind of project, but it's a band called Drowned Hamster. So the P is for political. Weirdo art school kind of stuff. There is definitely a punk edge to it. There's a few songs on here that are definitely, punk. But it's a band that I know nothing about. You see the record occasionally. It's kind of a mid-priced thing. You got lanky Burton Cummings. I don't know anything about this band. Don't know anybody that does. But yeah, Drowned Hamster. I know they can't spell. And then we go to this. Generics, Societal Hemhorrage, self-released. This was recorded in 1983 and released as a cassette. The band was on tour. Their van flipped, and the singer was critically injured and ended up dying, a little while later. So they re-released the demo as a 7-inch in 1983 with an extra song added to it. There were people in this band that were in Crash 80s. People went on to be in Legend Killers, October Crisis, Condo Christ. This is a good, solid punk record. Very gravelly vocals. It's kind of like if the Demics kind of dumbed themselves down and got a little more obnoxious, it would sound like Generics. Yeah, a very good record. This thing used to be everywhere, and now you barely ever see it, and it's kind of pricey, I guess, kind of in the mid-price range, but super good record. And somebody out there liked it enough, somebody in Germany liked it enough to bootleg it. It's a reasonable hand-drawn facsimile. There was a few differences to the original, but yeah, I was actually surprised when I saw it, picked it up, and learned that it was a German bootleg. So yeah, Generic, Societal Hemhorrage, released in 1985, recorded in 1983. One more record to deal with, and it's one that I got recently, and I didn't know anything about this band, and I'm not sure if I ever actually even heard of them before this, but it does have a member of Crash 80s in it. It has people from Second Thoughts, 63 Monroe member, Sheep Look Up, Whining, Dining, Drilling, Magic Bin Men, Sub Rosa, the list goes on. But it's a band called Conning Tower. The record's called Indian Dancing. And the B-side, it's got a really annoying font, so I can't read it, but the B-side is Looking Up From Under. This is kind of more of a, well, it's from 1984, it's self-released. It's kind of more in the post-punk vein. It's weird. It's like something you'd hear on college radio at like 3 o'clock in the morning, like on Brave New Waves, if you're Canadian and know what that is. It's definitely something you'd hear on Brave New Waves at like 3 in the morning. It's weird. It's kind of dark. It's interesting. There's a string section in here now and again. It's just kind of takes you off guard. But I've definitely never seen this band play live, and I'm not sure that I ever even heard of them before this. And if I did, I've forgotten. But interesting find nonetheless. I just picked this up recently. So Conning Tower. So that's it for the records of early London punk rock. I don't have a whole lot of ephemera. There's not a lot of stuff out there. There is a book, a Graphic Underground London, 1977 to 1990. which was kind of released in conjunction with a kind of an exposition or whatever, a show somewhere downtown that was like all flyers and that. So it's a lot of the reproductions of flyers and a few pictures and shit like that. Interesting book to have. I don't have any of the old flyers. You never see them turn up anywhere. Nobody ever wants to sell them, so maybe I would buy some if I saw them. I do have a couple of reproductions from of the flyers from the from that flyer show at Uranus at the Blue Boot, or no, at the Cedar Lounge. Sorry, same thing. Got another Uranus one here, also from the Cedar Lounge. And I've got a Demics one from the Polish Hall, which is a place I used to go see shows, but that was back in the days when it was all metal shows. But yeah, you got Demics, Sophisticados, and the Pop-Tarts. Kind of cool. And there is a documentary about early London punk. It's called Stinkin Out The Joint. I think it was created and produced by the local news outlet. I will link. I'll link all this shit in the description. But if it's of any interest to you, then check it out. Sorry if my rambling has become annoying, but I'm an annoying guy. So whatever. Have a cool Canada Day if you observe such things, and if not, have a cool wherever the fuck you are day. See you later.